I I knew I would find you out here. I'm sorry about earlier. I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to yell at you. You scared me. You scared me with that scuba mask. It's stupid. I don't mean you, I mean me. This whole situation. I yelled at you over a scuba mask. Where did the kid get it anyways? From that boy down the street? Should we be honest with each other? I know it was in our vows, and I still mean it, but there's something I never told you about, and in a messed up way, it sort of correlates to you playing around with that mask, and it's scaring me. I mean, I don't know how outrageous it was. I mean, I just can't really explain it. Jeez. I trust you. I trust you with all my heart, and I know you do the same thing for me. But what I'm going to tell you happened to me a long time ago, and it's something I've never told anybody else. And I ask that you just listen to me and save your questions for the end about it. Just know that I still barely understand what exactly happened to me and some of my friends from a few years ago. Okay, so long ago, when I was still in college, I had a group of friends that I liked very much. There was Travis, Ed, Alice, and Megan. So I met Travis first, and by extension I met his friend, Ed. And now, Travis was a good guy, very outspoken, very extroverted. And then we had Ed, who I guess was more of the shy person of the group. He was very introverted, soft-spoken. He was alright, very good guy. He would always come up with crazy ideas. It's part of jokes, like who would win in a fight, and it'd be something silly. Now, Travis had a sister, and her name was Alice. And Alice grew to become very fond of Ed, and for the longest time they were a couple, and I thought they really hit it off. And even though I haven't heard from them in a long time, I like to imagine that maybe they got married. And Alice had a friend named Megan, and I thought Megan was very special. I grew to become quite fond of her. I think, the others, Travis, Ed, and Alice, and maybe even Megan herself, knew that I had feelings for her. I think partially of why I never told you about them was because I just didn't want you to, have somebody that you would compare yourself to. Though I suppose it doesn't really matter. Megan is, I guess she was a lot like you, but things didn't work out between us. Every time I saw her, looked upon her, and looked her in the eye, I kept seeing this look of terror that was about her. But I'm jumping ahead. So, one fall semester, we get into the Christmas season. And it's the usual bout of, stressing about finals, studying, drinking, and, the respite that comes afterwards with the winter break. And so Travis is a man with a special way with words, and he convinces us all to go to this cabin up in the mountains, and he says something along the lines of getting it for a great deal. It's practically a bargain. And at the time it sounded great. Not gonna lie, I was really looking forward to it, and I was kind of looking forward to spending some time with Megan. Perchance spending time with her kind of away from the group and be more intimate with her, so to speak. And so we stock up on provisions. Come to think of it, I think we had more beer than actual food. You can thank Alice and Ed for that. We put them in charge of the budget. And so one of the weird things right off the bat was that Travis asked me to bring together some tools. So I oblige, and I bring what few tools I could afford at that time: a socket set, a blowtorch, and some soldering that I had on hand. And he asked Megan to secure some old bedding material that she might have, stuff that was going to be thrown out or sent to Goodwill. And so we culminate all this materials, and we drive up there, and one of the big issues is that a lot of things in the mountain is the system of cabins. We drive out to the one that's furthest away, and apparently this is one of the more recently built cabins. And we can tell this by the fact that the road going to it kind of ends abruptly. So this means that we have to park our cars a good ways away. It's a pretty long walking distance, and we finally get up to the cabin. And the reason that admission was free, the reason being was that Travis's uncle owns a lot of the cabins up there, and the one we were staring at was one of the new ones built. And so this means that we can stay for free so long as we do the hard, meticulous labor of setting up a lot of things. So Travis didn't lie to us. I think, despite all the hard work we have to do, I still rather enjoy that part of the trip. And so it consisted of us soldering pipes, cleaning floors, checking the roof to make sure there's no leaks. And we had, the winter break, so we had ample time, and when we took breaks, we did a lot of recreational stuff about the cabin. So Travis was really big into skeet shooting, and so we brought along a couple of shotguns. He had a pump action and an over-under, which means that it essentially is a double-barreled shotgun. And Ed bought a new camera recently, and me and him were messing around with it on the back porch of the cabin, and we were using it to sight in on some stuff. So in conjunction with my binoculars, we were able to sight in on some birds, the local trees, and a cell phone tower off into the distance. And we did a lot of work. I remember the girls were doing a lot of indoor stuff, like setting up bedrooms and all that. And I remember for a time, good God, I remember for a time that Ed and Alice kind of disappeared on the group for a while. We didn't see him for some time. We were pretty limited in stuff that we can do. The house, the cabin itself, was off the grid. So even though we had plumbing, it wasn't hooked up by any sort of electrical means. And I think we had a phone, but we were never told whether or not it actually worked within the house. And things were really fun. We got there in the morning, worked all during the afternoon, and so eventually when the evening came, we started winding down. And I remember storm clouds were coming in, and this was the start of this storm of the decade. Essentially, this polar vortex from up north would be coming down and would trap us within the cabin, but I'm kind of jumping ahead. Eventually, we heard this explosion or something. I thought it was like some sort of earthquake because everything inside the house shook. And so me and Travis go out to the porch to see what was going on, because we didn't know if like a tree or something fell over. And we're out looking at the horizon and the sun is setting, and so that gives us some contrast with the tree line. And it's there that I noticed that the cell phone tower off in the distance was cut down. I don't know how else to describe it. Part of it was still sticking up from the tree line, but the upper half of it was just gone. And so I was pointing this out to Travis, and even though we knew that there might be a chance for like a snowstorm to occur that night, we still couldn't figure out why the cell phone tower was damaged. And then we heard a helicopter coming, and eventually over the woods circled this black helicopter. I had my binoculars with me and I tried to make it out, but it was a kind of helicopter I've never seen before. And as it was circling over the woods, I don't know how else to explain it. It just crumbled up like a ball of tinfoil getting crushed. It crumpled up and fell to the ground. And me and Travis were immensely taken aback by this. And so that's when the panic starts to set in. And I think then was our descent down the rabbit hole. And so me and Travis talk about it, and we come to the conclusion that there must have been some sort of accident, and now we, as the only people who have seen it thus far, are the first responders to this helicopter crash. So we go back inside the cabin and we tell the girls what's happened, and we grab Ed to help us out. I go to my room and I get some of my first aid stuff that I have on hand, and we take some flashlights, a blanket as well, and we start making our way into the woods. We told the girls to wait for us on the deck, and as we're setting off, we had a little bit of trouble trying to find the helicopter. I think in part because, it was during the snow, and it was getting dark. But eventually we saw evidence that we were getting close to some sort of crash site. And what this was a bunch of fallen over trees and a lot of things in the area that were smoldering away, like old dead wood that was on fire and getting snuffed out by the snow. I remember as we got closer to this presumed crash site, Ed went up to one of these smoldering piles and he found like a metal rod with some like tinfoil next to it. And he takes out a stick and he uses it to push it out of the pile, and like an idiot he reaches for it, and I tell him, Ed, what are you doing? Put that down, you're gonna burn yourself. And he's fumbling with the stuff in his hands, and he looks to me and he says, no, it's alright. And so I'm very much confused, and I ask him, is it hot? He tells me, no, it's cold to the touch. And so Ed pockets the stuff and we continue onwards. And eventually it's getting darker than what it was before, of course. And eventually we come to this rock structure thing sticking up out of the ground. And, that was my first assumption anyways, but Travis seemed to think that this must be where the helicopter crashed, because he could see, I thought it was smoldering piles, but he could see something that he thought was like lights that would be on the interior of the helicopter flickering inside, and they were all red. So we get closer, and it's getting pretty dark, and Ed has his camera out recording this. I don't know why. I think he probably did it as some sort of sick entertainment to like record our adventure out into the woods or something. I don't know. And it's around this time that Travis and the rest of us are really close to it, and so Travis calls out, is anyone there? And there's no response. And so we then hear something, and what we hear is a deer somewhere in the woods, and it's crying out as though it were in pain or something like that. So Ed, with his camera, he kind of zooms in on this structure in the woods, and he says he sees a man walking out from it, and he's describing it to us, and he says the man is walking to this fallen over tree, and there's a deer there on the ground, and it's dark, and Ed can't really describe what the man looks like. And it's then that there's this red light coming from that man in the distance. There's a red light coming out, and we don't know exactly what it is. And so Ed, he sort of like freaks out, and we ask him, what's going on? And it's then that the deer calling out is suddenly quiet, and in the next instant, as we're asking Ed what's going on, there's this like beam of red light that shines in our direction, and then all of a sudden Ed starts screaming, and I guess by instinct he starts running backwards towards the cabin. and we follow along with them because we have no idea what's going on. And so we eventually make our way back to the cabin, and the girls are standing there, and we try briefing them on what happened, but the most information lies with Ed, and he can't give much of a coherent story because he's like terrified or something. And so Megan and Alice kind of assumed that we were like playing some sort of prank on them, a joke, if you will. And so they kind of calm us down. Alice calms Ed down, and they invite us back inside, and that's where we have a short dinner. Now, I guess I should give some context into the layout of the cabin. It's something like a half circle, and so the deck makes up the back porch makes up the back flats half of this circle, and you have this wide porch, and you have the tree line, and that's where we originally came from. And to get inside the cabin, you have to go through these sliding doors, and that takes you to the living room, which has this large couch and a large fireplace. And to the right of that is the kitchen table, and to the right of that, against the wall, is the kitchen itself. And so beyond the living room and the kitchen is, of course, all of the rooms. And there's also a stairwell, which will take you up to the attic, and there's another one that will take you down into the basement. And so coming in from the sliding door, beyond that, like straight forward, is the front door. And if the road had been finished, you could go out the front door and to this little roundabout. And that would take you to the main road, which takes you down off of the mountain. Of course, the road isn't finished. And the only other structure on the property is a shed, and that's like to the far left of the porch, and it's close by to the house. And so we're sitting down at the kitchen table, and I have my back to the sliding door, and Ed is sitting next to me, and across from him is Alice, and she takes notice of how distraught Ed is. And sitting to the left of me is Travis, and on my right is Megan. And we're talking and discussing things during dinner. The girls had heard a report on the radio about the potential for a snowstorm to be coming in. They, of course, try to, call their parents to let them know they are okay. But, of course, that didn't work because the cell phone tower was down. And so I remember we were just talking about benign things, trying to calm down. And I remember Meg, she looks at me, and she quickly looks down, and she asks me, how long do you plan to have your friend outside for your prank? And so I ask her what she means, and so Travis and I both look behind us, and I guess Travis sees it before I do, but there was some head sticking up from beyond the porch, just on the fringe of the window, which quickly disappeared. So Travis panics, and I go outside with him, but there's nothing to be seen. We pull out our flashlights, and we look around in the snow, and there's no prints to be seen. And as we turn back, I notice on the railing, there was like somebody's hand had been placed, but it was a palm, but in terms of fingers, there was only 3 of them. And I point this out to Travis, and so when we go back inside and shut the door, we immediately go to Ed, and we ask him to pull out his camera for us. And so he looks at us and he's distraught, and he reaches for it, but he reaches for his left pocket, and it's then that we notice that his left pocket is like this horrible burn into it, like if it were a hot knife dragged upon the fabric of the jacket, it would be like the stab done to the pocket and then went outwards. And he reaches inside of it and he pulls out the rod and the metal sheet that we found earlier, and he sets that aside. And he remarks again that the stuff feels cold. He takes off his jacket, and it's there that we see that he has like this horrible burn going through his shirt and to his skin. So of course he panics, and so I take out my first aid kit, and I have a burn shield within it, and Alice helps me to treat Ed's burn, something like a 1st or 2nd degree. And after we bandage him up, he pulls out the camera from his other pocket. And it's there we get to properly see what exactly Ed saw that freaked him out so much. And so he was filming a lot of stuff, and we cut ahead to around the time the 3 of us were walking to the wreckage. And with this enhanced zoom on the camera, we're able to see that the object that I thought was a rock was actually like some sort of, I don't know how to describe it, it was like some sort of hubcap partially stuck into the ground, and those red embers I saw were actually windows, and the interior was lit with red lights. And out of nowhere, we see this man that Ed talked about. So even though we have the zoom on the camera, it's still hard to see. But he's a man dressed in all black, and he has his head exposed, and he has what my initial impression was very little to no hair. And so this guy walks over, and we can see the deer with its antlers on the ground, kind of flailing about feebly. And that's the first red light that we see coming from its hands. And it goes to the deer, and the deer goes quiet, and that's when we start asking Ed what exactly is happening. And so this man in the distance, he looks up and right at Ed, and it's then that we can kind of see details a little bit more clearly. So this man, he has kind of an angled face, a small mouth, a very small nose. The biggest feature about this thing were its eyes. Actually, these large, black, almond-shaped eyes. And so it looks at us, and that's the red light that we saw, and this thing shot the red light at Ed, and it hit him, and that's when Ed panicked, and we ran off away into the cabin. And And so this is reason enough for everybody to be really freaked out, and the girls still think that we're trying to play some sort of elaborate prank on them. But Alice looks at Ed, and Megan then believes that what's going on is real, but we're all in disbelief of what exactly is happening. So Travis freaks out, and he goes to his room, and he comes back with his skeet shooting stuff. And so he takes out his pump action, and he pulls out the other shotgun and gives it to me. And what he tells us to do is that he wants Ed and the girls to go to every room and make sure that the storm shutters are closed for all the windows, and if they can, they need to move furniture in front of the windows. Meanwhile, me and Travis go outside and we turn on the generator off to the side on the porch. So before we were mostly working by flashlights and electric lanterns, but with the generator on, we have floodlights and lights on the interior of the cabin going on, so we can see more clearly inside and out. Travis, when we get back inside, Travis directs us to move things around in the living room. And as he put it, his plan was that whatever these things are, they have some sort of interest in us. So his plan is that with the lights on, we'd be able to see them all around, and if they tried getting inside the cabin, then the only feasible way to do that would be through the sliding glass doors on the back porch. And so we essentially have, what was it Travis called it? A killing field. We had ourselves a killing field. And, girls are still in disbelief. Ed is kind of distraught, and, Alice has this maternal nature to her. And so she's trying to comfort Ed, and Ed, I think out of fear, gets sick, and he goes to the bathroom to vomit. And so I'm sitting there with Megan discussing things. And it's then that she, points out the weird material stuff that we found, that Ed found and brought back. And so I, take it to this makeshift tool bench that we made. And I take the metal rod and I put it in a vise. And I start pulling on it. And I pull it to around a 45-degree angle, very steep. And it makes this series of snaps and pops. And I half expected it to break. But when I let go of it, the metal started to slowly snap and pop right back into its original place. And I take a blowtorch nearby and I light it and I take it to the metal rod. And after a short time, I run my fingers over it and I have to pull my hand away. Not because it's hot, but because the metal is freezing, like dry ice, and it was hurting my hands. When we played around with the metal sheet, it exhibited a lot of similar qualities. I remember Megan crumpled it up and set it back down the table, and it slowly resumed its original shape. Though as the night progresses, the early hours of the late evening, the storm outside is definitely getting worse. There's a lot of snow built up, and it's slowly coming down so much so that's kind of hard to see off into the distance. And so I remember I go to the bathroom to check up on Ed and Alice, and she's comforting him and stroking his head. And so I encourage the two of them to, come back into the living room with me, Megan, and Travis. And we're sitting there for a long while. It was just Alice, Ed, me, and Megan. And Travis was over by the kitchen window, overlooking his killing field, waiting for, sign of anything. And so we were sitting there, and off on another table is our storm radio that I think Megan brought. And I remember I was talking to Megan, and she scratches her face, and she's looking away at me, and she's looking at the other table, and she's taken aback, and I look with her, and I see the radio on the table is the knobs are moving independently. And so you see the bar on it sliding down, and then I notice that the antenna is rising up of its own accord. So we stare at it, and then, as abruptly as this thing started moving, it started blaring this horrible, loud frequency, this, ear-piercing sound. And so we all get up, and we're all covering our ears. And, we're scared shitless. We have no idea what's going on. And, I guess to Travis's credit, he comes in to intervene, and he shoots it. And so, the radio goes flying across the room and shatters to pieces. So even though the radio is destroyed and lying on the floor, in the aftermath of this, I kind of recounted that it feels as though somebody's taking a cigarette to the base of my neck, and then I hear Megan screaming about something similar, and then as quickly as this all happened, the pain subsided, and we looked each other over for any sort of burn mark, but there wasn't anything. And it's then that, by the lighting from the interior of the house, we can see over by the window that there's a large chunks of snow falling down. And it's then that we hear something like movement on the roof. The cabin is relatively new, so it hasn't properly settled in yet. So we hear something like somebody falling over on the roof. So Travis levels his gun and fires a couple of times into the roof, and then, he looks to me, he tells me to grab the other shotgun, and we both run outside, look right up from the porch up onto the roof, and we can see the holes that Travis made, as well as some sort of depression in the snow, as though somebody fell down on the roof. But beyond that, there was nothing else there. No footprints around the cabin, no footprints that we could see from the ground. And so we come back inside the cabin, and it's then that we kind of discuss what our next move is going to be, because we don't know what's going to happen to us next. And so, unfortunately, Ed is getting he's distraught again, and he's even worse than before. He's getting hysterical on us, and he talks about how we should probably leave. Of course, me and Travis are of the opinion that that's a stupid idea, since our cars are parked so far away, and we don't really know how many there are out there. Could just be one, could be like dozens. When we heard the pitter-patter on the roof, it sounded as though there was like more than one person up there. And so, first order of business was that Travis wanted the holes patched up, and so I go down into the basement to get some fabric materials, some nails. We take a ladder and we start hammering in a blanket. So Travis is hammering this away, and I'm at the base of the ladder holding it up. And Megan is there with me to help give Travis nails. Alice, on the other hand, is in the bathroom, and so we weren't paying much attention to Ed at all. It's then that we hear the front door to the cabin open, and so we all drop what we're doing and freak out. And we go to the table, Travis and I go to the table where we left the guns, and my gun, the over-under, is missing. So we put it together that Ed, trying to follow through on his own plan of getting to the car and maybe going for help, is finally being enacted. And so I take the other shotgun and I go outside in a hurry and go looking for him. I follow his footprints in the snow for a while, but if the storm getting as bad as it was outside, and me and my thin layers, I can't really go too far. But through the snow, I can see what I assume to be Ed's flashlight. And when I walk up to it, I see that it's two things: Ed's flashlight and the other shotgun. And I'm looking at this, and I pick it up and I evaluate the two, and I see that the shotgun, the end of it, the end of the barrel is melted, and there's smoke coming from it, as in, Ed must have been shot at. The thing melted, and now being in the snow is producing all this steam. And so I call out for Ed, and I get no reply. It's then that I kind of notice that the snow around me is getting very red. And so I look off into the distance and I see that there's this ball of red light coming towards me, freaking out as to what this could mean. I start running back to the cabin. I'm back inside, and I never ran so hard before in my life, and so I'm on the floor, almost practically sick, and of course Alice is asking me where Ed is. And I'll be honest, I couldn't really tell her what had happened, because I'm part of how extreme the situation was, and also due to, this is my friend. I just couldn't really tell her, but, everybody in the room looked at the gun, and I guess it was then we came to understand what exactly had happened to him. And of course Alice started crying, and Megan tried comforting her as best as we can. We went back to the living room, and Travis went back to the kitchen window, and it was from there that we discuss a possible plan of action, but as we kind of concluded, we're trapped there. We can't get to our cars, and there's no telling what they might do next. So as we were sitting down together, I was watching the candles on the table that the girls lit earlier for some dinner ambience, and I noticed that some of them were flickering, and this scared the hell out of me because I thought that a draft must have occurred, and the house is sealed tight, and so I feared that a door was open somewhere. And so I quietly point this out to the girls, and then I go over and tell Travis about it. And he devises the plan that he and I sort of scan the house and see if there's anything going on. And so I remember he went down into the basement, and I go upstairs to the attic. And it's there I see that the window, even though the lock is on the inside, is partially open, and there's snow beneath the ground by the window. And so I run back to the stairwell, and I yell down to Travis, but then before I can say anything, I hear a door slam, and I run down, and Travis is standing to the door of my bedroom, and he's yelling for Alice to go get some rope. And he looks to me and he says that he saw one of them wandering in, and I guess walked into my room, and he saw it, and now we have the thing trapped in there. So Alice comes with Megan, and we tie a knot from my bedroom door to the bathroom door, and so this thing can't get out. And of course the girls are freaking out about it, and me and Travis try discussing what our next plan of action is to do, because somehow this thing made its way into the cabin without us knowing or us seeing it. And it's then that we're interrupted, and there's this ray of light that shoots through the door, and I can smell burning of the wood of the door. And so Travis, he takes his shotgun and he fires a couple of shots through the door, and we hear a heavy dropping sound. So Travis opens the door, and it's there we see, I guess for the first time in its clearest, we see the body of one of these beings lying down on the floor. And so we were very much frightened by it, lying down on the ground. So we only got a brief look at it because Travis shut the door and redid the knot to kind of keep it in there, but it had shoes and all black clothing. It's hard to describe, but I saw its head. It was lying down off to the side, and I can see again the small mouth, the minuscule nose, and the large black eyes. So we go back to the living room, and it's there that the power cuts out from the generator. And so me and Travis immediately go out. We're incredibly cautious, but with a wide field of view around the porch, we couldn't see anything. An interesting aspect about the sabotage of the generator is that the generator itself was unharmed. It was just the cable connecting it to the house was fried. And so we didn't really have any alternative, so we just shut the generator off and go back to the house. And we told the girls all about this, and they're as freaked out as we are. And so we're sitting down, and, Alice, for the first time since I came back, speaks about going back out to find Ed again. What she wanted was to follow through with Ed's, own plan of going to the cars and, despite the storm, try to get to, another cabin or get to the nearby town and just get help however we can. So, the way we're sitting down is kind of important. So Travis is, again, over by the window, and I'm sitting down. The fireplace is behind me, and the girls are in front of me sitting on the couch. And we're trying to discuss this, and I try to counsel Alice that it isn't feasible for us to go out there, since it may very well be that in an instant we can all be dead or gone. Whatever happened to Ed, which of course sends her crying again, and I feel bad, and I try looking to Megan to see what she thinks. But, as I'm looking at her, she immediately kind of jumps on the couch, and she's screaming, and she's pointing behind me, and I look behind myself, and I see that, there's nothing there, per se, but I could see those dark eyes, those two dark almond eyes behind me. And so what I think was that somehow these things could make themselves invisible, but the eyes about them couldn't be invisible with them, if that makes sense. And so this thing was invisible, and I guess trying to just casually walk right past us to go out the back door. And so Megan is screaming, and from the table I take up one of the pipes we replaced from earlier, and I hit this thing in its back, I think, and so it falls over onto the floor on its hands and knees. And, Travis comes over, but he can't get a clear shot because I'm kind of in the way. And this being, it stands back up, and I guess tries making a break for it, but I hit it over the head, and that causes it to go crashing down onto the floor. And so it kind of, it's lying down, and it's trying to pull itself away, and then it turns onto its side and extends its left hand out towards me. And the moment it does this, I take the pipe and I take another swing, and I hit it in the hand, and I can hear the hand dislocating, and I think some of the bone breaking. And this thing grabs its left hand and falls back to the floor, and its head cocks back, and I suppose its head was thrown back as though it were screaming out in pain, but we didn't hear anything. So the thing is kind of on its elbow, trying to crawl away from me into a corner, and it's there that I guess I get a close-up look to it. So it's a bit hard to see. The clothing of it kind of makes it blend in with the darkness of the room, but I could see its face reflected by the fireplace. And I see where I hit it on the head produced a crack, and this crack goes down to the left eye of this thing. And it's there I kind of realized that the head of this thing isn't a head, but some sort of helmet. And that's where I hear it breathing. That's why that scuba mask you pulled out freaked me out when you started using it, because they had the same sound. So this thing is like hyperventilating out of fear. It's panting hard, and I can see within the lenses of its helmet the condensation build up and going in and out with each breath. And it's making a lot of short, quick breaths. And I'm kind of taken aback by this, so I take a step backwards and I let the pipe fall out of my hand to the floor. And so Megan asked me, am I okay? And Travis does too, and I tell them both that I'm fine. I guess the simplest way I put it was that I looked at this thing and I said to them, it's alive. So I take a step back away from it. And it's then that it looks away from me down to its wounded arm, and it grasps it with its right hand. And I could see that, for God knows how long, how many minutes had passed, I see that it's repairing its hand on its own, like by touch alone. And so its hand is gradually being corrected and falling back into place. And it's then that there's this white light coming in from the sliding window, the sliding door, which is absurd because this is the middle of the night. And it's there that we can see that there's several of these figures walking towards the porch. And there's no other way to explain it, but we then woke up on the couch. And by my estimates, we woke up sometime in the afternoon. But as we're sitting on the couch, we were sitting down in unusual positions. Like I was sitting down on my side, and Travis was had his back to the couch as he was sitting on the floor. I remember distinctly that Megan asked me, looked at me and asked, "Are you real? Is this all real?" And I hand her one of the beers we had sitting on the table, and she drinks it. And I help to comfort her however I can. And, it's then she accepts that, this is reality right now, where we are in the present or whatever. And so we get up, and immediately Travis is inquiring about his gun, which is nowhere to be found. And it's then that we hear something coming from one of the bedrooms, and Alice immediately runs to it, and we follow behind her. And she goes into one of our bedrooms, and it's there that we kind of see that there's like severe structural damage to the house, done by what I think was the blizzard from the night before. But we go into this room, and it's one of the few rooms that are still intact. And Ed is lying down on the bed, freaking out with his jacket thrown over him. And he has his shirt off, and he's in his underwear. And so, Alice immediately runs to him and starts comforting him. And we start to ask him what exactly had happened to him. So just like with him, his memory is missing important parts. What he remembers was that after he ran from the cabin, he remembers that there was this ball of light that came towards him, and out of nowhere, one of those beings appeared close next to him and shot the end of the barrel of the gun, and he drops it and he just bolts for where he assumes the cars are all parked. But as this was at the peak of the blizzard, and so visibility is incredibly difficult for him, and he doesn't have a flashlight. So I think he wandered around the mountain for quite some time, lost in the woods, and eventually he remembers that he was outside for so long that eventually the storm lessened somewhat. Hard to see still, but he remembers getting frostbite, and he remembers with the rising of the sun looking down close enough and he can see that his fingers were turning blue. And he tries to keep warm as best as he can, but he's absolutely miserable. And he remembers falling down a slope, and he's pretty hurt, and then there's like a gap in his memory. And so he remembers those beings surrounding him, like on a table or something like that, and they were doing work on him. And he remembers that like they injected something into him because he felt pain in each one of his limbs, and the frostbite went away. And there's another gap in his memory, and he wakes up in the cabin, and somebody just throw his jacket and pants at him, and so he kind of brushes this stuff aside and looks up, and he sees several of those beings walking out of the room, and one of the last ones to walk out turns back around and looks directly at him, and it's clutching his wrist, and somehow this being closes the door without ever touching it. So needless to say, Ed was terrified, and he had no idea what was going on, and it wasn't until we eventually woke up that he kind of like meekly called out for us, and that's when we came in to see him. And so some time passes and we investigate the place, and there's a lot of damage done to it from trees that blew over by the blizzard. I remember looking out, and the devastation was pretty severe down the whole side of the mountain. And I remember looking into my room, and that's where quite plainly I see that there's like a tree that fell over, and it's right over the bed. And so, remembering what had happened earlier that night, I immediately take a look around on the floor of my room, but there's no evidence of blood. And it's there that from where Travis shot into my room, I can see that both shots from the shotgun ended up going through the door and going through the back wall. And so my impression is that that being had tried to fire a warning shot, and then Travis fired into the room, but this thing was standing off to the side, and so it's just on its quick thinking on its feet just dropped down to the floor and feigned death upon us. And I guess that was the end of our rabbit hole adventure, so to speak, kind of the end of our nightmare. So eventually we hear what sounds like trucks outside, and it's the local police force, Travis's uncle, and a snowplow that Travis's uncle was able to get for the sole purpose of getting up here to the mountain. And so we go outside and we greet them. Alice and Ed are still in the room, and Megan comes with me and Travis as we greet them, and they start asking us about a plane crash. And I'm very much confused about this because we quite well saw a helicopter go down in the woods, as well as a lot of other things, but we left that out. And so they tell us that there was a plane in the area flying when the storm came, and they assume that it must have got technical difficulties or something and fell from the sky. And so I looked at Travis, and I looked to him so he could back me up on what we were saying, but he says to me, yes, let's go show them the plane crash. And so Travis directs them to where they estimate the helicopter crash was, which was a good distance away from the other crash site that the three of us found earlier. And so we go back inside the cabin, and Megan asked me about the crash site, and she was kind of hoping that we could go look at it. And it's then that memory comes back to me, and so I go back to Ed, and I ask him if he had his video camera with him, and he says that of the things that he grabbed were shotgun shells in his camera, so that way he could show the camera to authorities so they could know that we were in deep shit. And so Alice gets his jacket for him and he fumbles around with it, but his keys are there, but his shotgun shells and his camera are both gone. And so in the back of my mind I knew what had already happened, but I needed seeing for myself, so I go to the table with all the tools on it, and the metal rod and the metal sheet we had found from earlier were both gone. And so I take Megan with me, and we walk into the woods, and eventually we find where the crash site was that me, Travis, and Ed had found. And though we comb the area, we can't find anything, no debris. The only evidence that this is the crash site is all the damage done to the earth and the trees that fell over. And so Megan is sitting down on a fallen tree, and I remember the deer I had seen from earlier, and so I'm kind of fumbling around through the snow, and eventually I find it, and I kick a lot of the snow off, and I see that this deer, probably when the ship or whatever it was had crashed, it had gotten impaled on a small tree, and so this thing must have been in a great deal of pain. And so when that being walked outside, it probably assumed that was the thing making all the noise. And so I look it over and I see that that being had done something of a mercy killing for this deer. And so with its light gun or whatever, it had shot it at the base of its neck, kind of severing the spine from the rest of it. And as Travis had told me yesterday, the day before, we talked about hunting, and he says that the quickest way to put down an animal would be to shoot it in the spine, in the heart, or in the head. And so I think this deer caught the attention of the being, and the being just put it down, essentially. So I walk back to Megan, and she's very much terrified, but I guess slowly calming down, and we sit down for a while, and we don't say anything to each other. And eventually I break the silence and I ask her if she's alright. And she tells me that she is, even though she probably isn't. And it's then that she asks me if I remember the radio. And, of course I did. And she says to me that right before Travis had shot the radio, she thought she heard something. She thought she heard someone speaking, but she looked around at us as we were all had our hands to our heads, trying to block out the loud frequency of the radio. And so none of us were speaking, and she knew it wasn't like some conscience of hers speaking to her. As she put it, she thought she heard someone speaking to her. It was distant, and she couldn't quite understand it, and then that's when Travis had shot the radio. And so we eventually go back to the cabin, and the rescue crews come back, and they talk about coming back or getting air support to help them out because they couldn't find much of anything. So I pull Travis aside, and as he explains it to me, they could find debris of some sort, like bits of metal all over the place, but no whole structure and no bodies that could indicate that something had crashed there, even though there was evidence of such. As with the other crash site, we can see that there was a lot of earth kicked up around and fallen trees. And so, eventually the search parties continue, but I don't think they ever found anything. And I think everybody was very much sick of the cabin. We afterwards packed up our stuff and kind of went back to town, and Alice and Ed stayed at Alice's parents' place, and Travis went back with them. And I remember saying goodbye to Megan, and we kind of talk about things between us, but as I talked to her, I couldn't get the vision of her scared, the terror in her eyes out of my head, and I think that's where things fell apart between us. So, I don't know what happened to all those guys. And I think Alice and Ed might have got married, and Travis and all of them went on with their careers as I did. But I don't know what happened to Megan. I think she might have dropped out of college. I hope the pressure of it all, the trauma of it, wasn't too much for her. And so that's the end of it, I guess. I'm sorry I yelled at you. Just know that I hope you understand, and that's alright if you don't. I've kind of gotten over it, but I think about it all the time. I kind of think, did we do the worst thing possible? Me and the rest of the guys. Think of it like this. Out of all the instances, they didn't kill us. Ed was lost on the mountain and he had frostbite, and they brought him right back to us. My final conclusion is that if they're ever going to come back, I'm sure they're going to be quite careful, but I eventually kind of concluded that, just as probable that they're never going to come back. Just never going to come back. So, what are your questions?